I closed out last time with the 3 conferences. What I want you to remember about these 3 conferences, for many years we had I want to say we have pro-communistic professors who tended to leave out these 3 conferences. So I said to myself, if I ever get to be a teacher, I'll at least include them. Well, the situation has changed a lot. But in effect, what happened to these conferences, I want you to remember, is that the groundwork was laid for the communist takeover of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Yugoslavia, Albania, Macedonia, East Germany, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, basically where that the communists took over Eastern Europe. And the United States more or less let them do it. If you look at the picture on page 755, and then there's another picture, the same picture, but on a smaller version of it, is located at the beginning of the next chapter. I don't see it now, but basically, if you look at and try to analyze the picture, you get the impression, or at least I do, that Stalin is a very forward-looking, energetic man. Churchill is somewhat worn out, but the man who really, really is completely worn out, only had 2 more months to live, is American President Roosevelt. Of course, Roosevelt was crippled and haggard, and he tried to hide that as best he could. If you could have met with Roosevelt at the time, you'd have seen a man who was, who simply could not walk, and the Secret Service man had to pick him up like a little child and carry him from his car to his wheelchair. In very, very bad health at this time, and only had a couple of months to live. Okay. All right. The conferences occurred in this order. The first one in Tehran in Iran. Now, the one person who was in all 3 of them was Stalin. At the first 2 were Churchill and Roosevelt. By the time of the Potsdam Conference, Roosevelt was deceased and Truman had taken over. So Truman attended the 3rd conference, and I read a book by Harry Truman, who said about the Soviets, they never fooled me after Potsdam, which was a half admission. They had fooled at Potsdam. Roosevelt apparently thought he meant that each of these countries would have their own self-determination. Russia interpreted it differently, the Soviet Union interpreted it differently, and they said, well, we need a buffer between us and Germany because Germany is going to shoot at us again, but it's not happening. So we need a bunch of buffer states between us and Germany. So in effect, the communists took over Eastern Europe, and they were to have control of Eastern Europe for 45 years. The Cold War began right at this point when it became obvious that the Soviet Union was going to take over Eastern Europe. And I'm old enough to remember we feared that, hey, the Soviet Union plans to take over the whole world with their communistic agenda, and we have to move in and stop them and contain them where they are. And that ends this chapter and takes us up to the next chapter. The Cold War, chapter 26. Oh yeah, there's that picture again on page 762, a smaller version of the one on page 755. By the way, Yalta is in the Crimea, which, if you're keeping up with the news at all, you know that it has made a lot of news here of late. the Grand Alliance, which was the alliance, I'm not going to write that down, but it was the alliance between the Soviet Union, the United States, and Great Britain. The Grand Alliance collapsed almost as soon as Germany was defeated. When Stalin saw his opportunity to grab up Eastern Europe, and he did so. Now, to keep Germany from fighting a war, I'm going to make a simplified drawing here. Germany was divided into 4 occupational zones, with the U.S. taking one zone, France taking another, Great Britain taking another zone, and the Soviet Union taking the other zone. Now, there was a little problem. The city of Berlin was inside the Soviet zone. Well, what they did with Berlin, they divided it up the same way. They divided up with Great Britain taking one zone, the Soviet Union taking another zone, France and the U.S. taking a zone. Now, the city of Berlin was divided into 4 zones, even though it was inside the Soviet zone. Now, this was create a total spot that was to go on for many, many years. And the idea was for the victorious nations to occupy Germany and to make sure that Germany did not go to war again. And to this day, some 70 years later, actually it's been 69 years since World War II ended in April, and basically the European part ended in April 1945. Some 69 years or so, Germany has not gone to war. But the United States and France and Great Britain joined together and said, we'll jointly control our part, and this became the nation of West Germany. In the meantime, the Soviet Union, they said we're not going to join, so they called their country East Germany. And for the next 45 years, Germany was to remain divided. As for Berlin, the part that was controlled by the United States, France, and Great Britain became West Berlin. And the Soviet part became East Berlin. What's that?
I said, can you say that again?
All right, the part of the Berlin that the Soviet Union controlled, that became East Berlin. The rest of Berlin, what the United States, France, and Great Britain controlled, joined forces together and they made East Berlin out of it. Now, basically, the United States, France, and Great Britain cooperated together, and they formed a nation of East Germany. And Berlin is no longer the capital, by the way.
It's not.
25 years divided.
For 45 years, Germany was to be divided, Berlin was to be divided. Now, in 1990, I'm going to jump ahead of it, the Soviet Union broke up. The Cold War ended, I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek. But the Soviet Union broke up, and Germany was united, and all the communistic nations of Eastern Europe became non-communist, including, well, Albania, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. They all abandoned communism, which had not worked. And East Berlin united to become the United City of Berlin, and East Germany united with West Germany to become a united nation of Germany. Germany wound up with less territory because the Soviet Union, Stalin said he wanted part of Poland, but then Poland had been a victim of the war, so he said, we'll give the western part of Poland to Germany, but I want to take part of Poland to serve as a buffer. You know, it put a distance between me and Germany in case Germany starts another war. So Stalin took over the eastern part of Poland, and the Germans who were living in the eastern part of Germany all wound up leaving. When I was a kid, our history book said they either have left or will leave, but now they've all left, and they went to live in Germany. So when it was over with, Hitler had said Germany needed more land. When it was over with, Germany had even less land. And Germany was to be divided for the next 45 years. In a speech, Prime Minister Churchill made a speech at a college in Missouri. I mean, yes, Churchill, the former British Prime Minister, came to the United States. And he said, an iron curtain has descended over Europe. And again, you don't hear as much about the Iron Curtain anymore. When I was a kid, we talked about Iron Curtain countries. The Iron Curtain countries were all the countries who were under communism, as opposed to supposedly the free countries that were not under communism. He said an Iron Curtain is extended over Europe. And then someone else coined the phrase Cold War. The Cold War was to last 45 years. I need that, do need to write that down. And it was called the Cold War because for the most part it did not erupt into a shooting war. In effect, it was a war of ideologies where the United States stood on one side with its allies and the Soviet Union stood on the other. And they were considered the world's two superpowers, US and Soviet Union. And for 45 years, they were on the opposite side of almost every issue. And the world went through one crisis after another. Your book talks about the Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan. Here's what I remember about the Truman Doctrine. He said we can't allow communism to spread any farther than it has, so he would give aid to any nation threatened by communism. Give aid to any nation threatened by communism, especially, now he had in mind, especially, your book mentions Greece. I'm going to add and Turkey. Especially, he said Greece and Turkey. Now, I want to say this about Turkey. Turkey is a Muslim country, and no Muslim country has ever gone under communism and stayed under communism. Anybody guess why? I mean, why is the Muslim world seemingly communist-proof? They're a lot alike. They're alike in one big area. They believe the government should have absolute control and control morality, but they have one big difference. Anybody guess? It should be obvious. The issue that keeps them apart is the issue of whether or not there's a God. The communists claim that there is none. The Muslim people are convinced that there is. Take that away and the two sides would probably unite and join together, but they stay apart for that reason. Turkey then was not likely to go communistic because the communists deny the existence of God, and most people in Turkey do not believe that. Not that all of Turkey is Muslim. About 40% of Turkey are either Christian or Jew, but most of them do believe that there's a God. Now, the other plan that came about, the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan. So much for the conferences. The Marshall Plan was the plan put forth by General Marshall after the war to rebuild Europe. However, it upset the Soviet Union because the money that was going to be sent to rebuild Europe was going to be sent to rebuild Germany, Poland, Great Britain, France, Italy, and none of it was to go to the Soviet Union. Now, folk, I can understand Stalin. You mean you're going to give money even to the people who are your enemies and let us out, leave us out? We fought alongside of you. But again, folk, the point I tried to make it to you in the last class, when you're America dealing with a man like Stalin, every move you make is going to be wrong. You can't. I mean, hey, we weren't going to help Stalin because, number one, we didn't have the resources to, and number two, the help we gave him, he was going to turn against us anyway and use it to try to take over more countries. But nevertheless, he could express a hurt feeling, hey, You're leaving me out and we've fought alongside of you. Again, that's what it's like to be friends with a man like Stalin. Every move you make is wrong. If you haven't bumped into a person like that in life, or had to work beside a person like that, or had to deal with those kind of people, you will sooner or later. Inevitably, you run into them. Again, I mean, I can see where the man had a point. I mean, the point was Germany had fought 2 big wars with Russia, and he wanted to make sure that he was more ready in case Germany decided to fight a 3rd war. Now, I can understand. And yes, it was true that he had fought alongside the United States and Great Britain in World War II, and he felt like he should get his share of the help the United States was going to give. The American people said, no, you have taken over in Eastern Europe. So Europe wound up dividing itself into 2 camps. Now your book shows the Berlin at the start of the war, and actually the city of Berlin, more than half of it went to the Soviets. Now I'm looking at page 766, where the French and British and U.S. only got about half of it together in the Soviet Union. Again, that's because the Soviet Union got to Berlin first.